Visceral fat is what most of us think of as belly fat. It is the term used to describe the fat that builds up within the abdomen. Visceral fat cannot be pinched, but it does expand your waistline, crowd your internal organs, and actively contribute to disease. In this video, I explain why this type of fat is harmful and how you can get rid of it. There are two main types of fat that get, and the term visceral refers to your viscera or internal organs. Now, at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that a common name for visceral fat is belly fat, and that is true and how most of us would describe it. However, it is possible to have both types of fat stored in your midsection. Generally speaking, the fat you can pinch is subcutaneous, whereas visceral fat lies behind the abdominal muscles within the cavity that holds. You can pinch is subcutaneous, whereas visceral fat lies behind the abdominal muscles within the cavity that holds the liver, stomach, and intestines. Now, the crowding of your internal organs is one of the reasons that this type of fat is undesirable. But even more concerning is the fact that visceral fat is more metabolically active than subcutaneous fat, and this higher level of metabolic activity increases the release of inflammatory substances and free fatty acids into your blood, which increases your risk of health problems like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and a related condition called insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a common barrier to fat loss. Insulin is your energy-storing hormone. When you develop insulin resistance, your cells no longer respond properly to insulin, causing energy to be stored as fat instead of being used, as they should, to insulin. And as a result, your body cannot utilize carbohydrates and other food nutrients as efficiently as they once did. And this leads to chronically high blood sugar and insulin levels that block the release of fat from fat cells. So when we get too much visceral fat, you can see that it hampers fat loss, putting us into this vicious cycle where these undesirable conditions work together to perpetuate themselves. Fortunately, a low-carb diet disrupts this cycle by keeping your blood sugar low and essentially lessening the amount of work that insulin is required to do. And this works because blood sugar and insulin rise to differing degrees depending on the macronutrient breakdown of the foods that you eat. Of the 3 macronutrients that supply your body with energy, carbohydrates are the ones that cause the most significant rise in blood sugar. Fats cause little if any rise, and protein has a moderate impact. Therefore, eating a low-carbs, high-fat, moderate protein diet will prevent blood sugar and insulin spikes, allowing your body to move into the low insulin state, needed to release fat from your fat cells. In fact, many studies have shown that low-carb diets are more effective than low-fat diets for reducing visceral fat. And an interesting point to note about the research is that lowering carbs was effective even when the reduction was modest. For instance, in this study, participants consumed 43% of their daily calories from carbohydrates. Now, many of you who have been interested in low-carb dieting will recognize that as a fairly high percentage, with a more typical range being less than 25% of your calorie intake. However, despite this modest reduction in carbs, participants who consumed the lower carbohydrate versus the lower fat diet lost more visceral fat and 4.4% more total fat. More on that in the next part.